members of the state Senate, I expect when we came in this chamber today, we probably had a pretty good idea how we were going to vote and how this was going to turn out. But let me ask you to reflect on that decision that you've made for just a few minutes while I tell you a personal story. Many of you know that I had a pretty unique, almost remarkable childhood. In 1958, a group of Lutheran churches in northern Minnesota bought a private boys' camp on the lake that I live on today. And my dad became the camp director when I was 4 years old. And I hear people talk all the time about how they remember going to summer camp and the week that they had at summer camp when they were little. And many of you here probably remember that, or your kids certainly have talked about that. Well, heck, I lived there. So it was a pretty remarkable childhood. In 1962, my dad, who was the camp director, recruited a young college student from Concordia College. Grew up in Senator Tomassoni's district in a little town in northern Minnesota. He recruited him to be a camp counselor. He later went on to the seminary and became a Lutheran pastor. I called my mother this weekend to wish her a happy Mother's Day and to talk about Ray. She said, Ray was the best friend our family has ever had. She said, in 1966, when your little sister Sarah was born, hydrocephalic, Ray was there for our family. And in 1967, when she died at 11 months old, Ray was there for our family. And in 1968, when my little brother came down with brain cancer and was doctoring at the University of Minnesota, Ray was there. And in 1987, when my little brother had a stroke, it was Ray that was there for our family. 1993, when my sister came down with leukemia and came down to the University of Minnesota for a bone marrow transplant, it was Ray who was at the university with my family. And it was Ray who drove from Minneapolis in 2003 up to the funeral of my little brother, be there with my family. Ray knows a lot about marriage. Married a lot of couples. Counseled a lot of couples through the highs that marriages have and some of the deep disappointments that sometimes happen in marriage relationships. He felt the excitement and could see the excitement in a couple's eyes as he married them. He felt the excitement in mine because in 1976 he married me. A few years later, he came out as being gay. And his employer in the church didn't treat him very well. And he had a very difficult ministerial career after that period of time. Today he's retired and he lives in Minneapolis. But something has always bothered me. That over the decades of his friendship with our family, he participated in and shared in the joy of so many marriages. but could never have one of his own. Vice President Mondale stopped by our caucus last week to share some thoughts about kind of the conclusion of the session and gave us an opportunity to ask some questions. And I believe it was Senator Bonoff that asked the question of him. She said, "Mr. Vice President, are there any votes you ever took that you feel really good about?" And he said, "You know, the decisions that I made that I feel best about were the ones that weren't popular at the time." And he went on to talk about a brief that he wrote when he was the Attorney General in a case called the Gideon case that was in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. Mr. Gideon, he explained, was an indigent who had been convicted of a felony, and he didn't have the money for an attorney. So then Attorney General Mondale wrote a brief to the U.S. Supreme Court that said that even if you're poor, you should have the right to a legal defense. And as he explained it to us, wasn't very popular at the time to use taxpayer money to defend an indigent who's going to be convicted of a crime. But he feels really good about having wrote that brief. And he prevailed at the Supreme Court, and today people, if they can't afford an attorney, our country supplies them one. And he talked about the votes that he took during the civil rights movement. And some of them weren't very popular, but how good he feels about those votes today. Laura and I have 4 grandchildren. 3 of them have been on the floor with me here on opening day. And I just ask myself, in the decades that follow, how are they going to feel about the decision that I made today? What kind of example am I going to have been? Will my vote today reflect what I learned growing up in that Bible camp? Acceptance, and I learned about diversity, and I learned about the golden rule of doing unto others. When the board opens up, members, just take a short pause. Think about how your kids or your grandkids in the decades to come, and feel about the kind of leadership that you provided to the state of Minnesota. My vote will be green. My vote will be for Ray. It will be for Casey. And it will be for everyone else in Minnesota who only want to have what Laura and I have. They want the joy of marriage.